Raheel had always believed that his relationship with Maureen was built on trust and understanding, a bond that felt unshakable and had stood the test of time. However, recently, he had started noticing subtle changes in Maureen's behavior. The warmth in her voice had faded, and her laughter, which once filled their home, now seemed reserved for someone else. She no longer shared the little details of her day with him, something she had always done without hesitation. At first, Raheel brushed it off as work stress or exhaustion, but as the days passed, the feeling that something was wrong became impossible to ignore. Maureen's phone was now constantly in her hands, and her expressions would change while reading messages. A smile would appear, one that Raheel had not seen directed at him in a long time. Whenever he asked her about it, she would casually say it was nothing and change the topic. The late-night texting, the sudden secrecy, and the emotional distance between them were unsettling. Raheel tried to convince himself that he was just being paranoid, that there was a reasonable explanation for all of this, but deep down, an uneasy feeling settled in his heart. One evening, as Maureen sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, Raheel decided to break the silence and asked if everything was okay because she seemed different lately. Maureen barely looked up and replied with a quick response about being tired, but her eyes betrayed her. She looked distant, as if she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right beside him. A few days later, Raheel noticed something strange. Maureen had started keeping her phone face down on the table, something she never used to do before. It was a small thing, but it added to the growing list of changes in her behavior. One night, she received a message while they were watching a movie together. She immediately picked up her phone and turned away slightly, typing a response before placing it back down. Raheel felt a pang of discomfort, but said nothing. The real turning point came when Maureen started coming home late from work more often. She had never been the type to stay out unnecessarily, yet now she had endless excuses, extra meetings, traffic delays, sudden plans with colleagues. Raheel wanted to believe her, but his instincts told him otherwise. He tried not to jump to conclusions, but the fear of losing her was beginning to take over his thoughts. One night, when Maureen had fallen asleep, Raheel sat beside her, staring at the ceiling. His mind was racing with unanswered questions. Was he imagining things? Was there really someone else? The uncertainty was eating him alive. He did not want to become the kind of person who invaded someone's privacy, but the anxiety was unbearable. The next morning, as Maureen got ready for work, Raheel decided he could not ignore it any longer. He needed to know the truth, and so, with a heavy heart, he prepared himself for what might be the hardest confrontation of his life. Raheel spent the entire day lost in thought, trying to decide how to approach Maureen without making things worse. He wanted to trust her, but the signs were becoming too obvious to ignore. That evening, as Maureen walked through the door, she seemed startled to see Raheel waiting for her in the living room instead of being occupied with his usual routine. He watched her carefully, noticing the way she hesitated before greeting him. There was an unfamiliar distance between them, something invisible yet undeniable. Taking a deep breath, Raheel finally spoke, his voice steady but firm, asking if there was something she needed to tell him. Maureen's expression changed for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable before she smiled and shook her head, insisting everything was fine. But Raheel was no longer convinced by her easy dismissals. The trust that once held their relationship together felt like it was slipping away. Over the next few days, the tension between them grew heavier. Maureen continued her late nights, and Raheel found himself unable to sleep, consumed by doubts and unspoken fears. He tried to tell himself he was overthinking, that maybe she really was just busy with work, but his heart refused to believe it. One evening, when Maureen left her phone on the table and stepped away for a moment, Raheel's eyes lingered on it. He battled with himself, knowing it was wrong to invade her privacy, but the urge to find the truth was overpowering. Before he could think twice, he picked up the phone and unlocked it, his hands trembling. What he saw made his stomach drop. There were messages from a contact saved under a generic name, but the conversation was anything but ordinary. The words were affectionate, filled with inside jokes and late-night confessions. His heart pounded as he scrolled, each message confirming what he had feared the most. Marine was emotionally invested in someone else. He set the phone down just as she walked back into the room. The look on his face must have given him away because she froze, her eyes darting to the phone and then back to him. A long silence filled the space between them before Raheel finally spoke, his voice hollow, asking her if there was anything she wanted to say. Marine opened her mouth as if to respond, but then closed it, looking away. That silence told him everything. The truth was out in the open now, and there was no going back. The weight of the truth settled between them like an unspoken storm, ready to break at any moment. Raheel sat motionless, his fingers gripping the armrest of the couch as he waited for Marine to say something, anything that could make sense of what he had just discovered. But she remained silent, avoiding his gaze, her hands fidgeting as if searching for an escape. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating, and the walls that had once held their love now felt like a prison closing in. Finally, Raheel exhaled sharply and asked the question that burned in his chest. How long had this been going on? Marine looked up, her eyes filled with guilt, but she hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. After what felt like an eternity, she admitted that it had started as harmless conversations, nothing serious at first, but over time, she had found comfort in those talks, in the attention she was receiving from someone else. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain, saying she never meant for it to turn into something that could break them apart. But Raheel could not bring himself to sympathize. His mind was flooded with memories of their relationship, of the promises they had made to each other. He had given her his trust, his love, and now all of it felt like it had been ripped away. He clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check, but the pain was unbearable. His voice broke as he asked her if she had ever thought about how this would affect him, about how he would feel knowing she had chosen to share a part of herself with someone else. Marine's eyes filled with tears, but Raheel could not tell if they were for him or for the situation she had created. She insisted that she had not physically betrayed him, that it was just conversations, just emotional support she had sought elsewhere. But to Raheel, it felt like a deeper betrayal. The connection, the intimacy, the late-night messages, it was all something that had once belonged to him, and now it had been shared with another. The reality of it sank in, leaving him hollow. The woman he had built his life around had let him slip away without even realizing it. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke again, asking her if she loved the other person. Marine hesitated for a second too long, and that silence was louder than any confession. It was in that moment that Raheel knew their relationship had changed forever. No matter what she said next, no matter how many apologies followed, something had shattered between them, something that could never be put back together the same way again. Raheel felt like the walls were closing in on him, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest. He had always believed that love was built on trust, on an unbreakable bond that could withstand any storm. But now, that belief felt foolish. He stood up abruptly, unable to sit in the same space where his heart had just been torn apart. Marine reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as she tried to hold onto something slipping away, but Raheel pulled back. He needed distance, needed air, needed anything that could help him process the chaos in his mind. The silence between them stretched endlessly before Marine finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She swore that she never meant to hurt him, that she had just felt lost, that she had convinced herself it was harmless. But Raheel's mind kept replaying the messages, the late-night conversations, the emotional connection she had shared with someone else. He had been here, loving her, trusting her, while she had been pouring pieces of herself into another person. His hands clenched at his sides, his breath uneven as he asked her the one thing that truly mattered now. Was there anything left between them worth saving? Marine hesitated, her lips parted as if searching for the right words, but the hesitation itself was an answer. Something had already died between them, something neither of them could bring back. She finally admitted that she didn't know, that she was confused, that she had gotten lost in something she never planned. But Raheel had no more patience for uncertainty. Love should never be a question, never be something one has to think about. It should be a choice, a certainty, an unwavering force. And in that moment, he realized that Marine was no longer sure about him. The pain of that truth hit harder than anything else. He took a step back, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. He told her he deserved more than uncertainty, that he had spent years building a life with someone who no longer knew if she wanted to be part of it. Marine's tears spilled over, but Raheel had none left to shed. He had spent every last ounce of his love believing in something that no longer existed. Without another word, he turned away, walking toward the door. Marine called his name, her voice desperate, but Raheel didn't stop. He had always believed that love was meant to be fought for, but now he understood sometimes the only way to win is to walk away. Raheel stepped outside, the cold air hitting his face like a final slap of reality. His heart pounded, his mind raced, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe. The walls that had suffocated him inside that house were behind him now, and with every step he took, the weight of betrayal grew lighter. But the pain still lingered, deep and raw, reminding him of everything he had lost. He had never imagined his love story ending like this. He had given his heart fully, trusted without hesitation, and in return, he had been left with nothing but unanswered questions and shattered trust. The city lights blurred in the distance as he walked aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. Marine had been his world, the person he thought he would grow old with, and yet, here he was alone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he already knew who it was. Marine had called multiple times since he left, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What was left to say? Apologies wouldn't erase what had happened, wouldn't bring back the version of her that had once loved him without hesitation. He slid his phone back into his pocket, knowing that no amount of words could fix what was already broken. The night stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, much like his future. He had spent so much time building a life around someone else that he had forgotten how to exist on his own. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The pain would take time to fade, the scars would remain, but Raheel knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let this define him. Love had betrayed him, but he refused to betray himself. He took a deep breath, lifting his gaze to the dark sky above. Somewhere, beyond the heartbreak, beyond the pain, a new chapter was waiting to be written. And this time, it would be on his own terms.